All right, welcome to our final portion here. We're going to fill in the history because that's what we do here. We fill in the history here on Filling in the History. Well, we fill in the history. We're going to go through the rest of 1835. We're going to go through most of 1836. And there's a lot going on here. I'm just going to start with the end of 1835. This is after our last episode. Joseph Smith is being misrepresented by somebody by the name of Almond Babbitt, who calls it a complaint to the High Council. All right. So a lot of the meetings that you're going to see from here on out in the record are mostly church courts. And these are people either saying the wrong things or getting into fights with each other, whatever. A lot of them have to do with Joseph Smith. Therefore, he is usually recused, but he does attend these trials. But anyway, what was interesting is that after that sort of was called out, we then have a meeting on the 28th of December. They bring some evidence of the complaint. Elder Babbitt confesses that his tone wasn't good, but also that he did not lie. So he did accuse Joseph of things. He says, well, I'm not lying about it. But I realized that I probably went too far. And apparently the council was satisfied with that answer. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like in the judicial system today, it's like all or nothing. But in this case, it was very like, oh, okay, well, we're not going to argue with that. But just please be nice with your tone. I thought that was interesting. And the very last thing that we get in 1835 is is sort of charges preferred against William Smith. So Orson Johnson brings some charges against William Smith. And if you remember, he and Joseph Smith got into a brawl where he sort of cheap shotted Joseph Smith from behind, and it turned into this big, huge thing. And so Orson Johnson was the one that brought it to court. And that's what we get from 1835. So 1836 begins. We have 482 existing documents in the Joseph Smith papers for 1836. We get two visionary experiences, the dedication of the Kirtland Temple, another section of the Doctrine and Covenants, and lots to be skipped. There's a lot of repetitive stuff here. We'll get to that in a moment. So the first thing is a council meeting. This is the first official thing. This is on the 2nd of January, 1836. We just celebrated the new year, and William Smith comes to the carpet, gets more details about Almond Babbitt and what happened with him. Both confessed before the leaders and were restored to their positions. So good for them. Now, what's really interesting is that this was sort of a foregone thing. And why? Is because the day before, so New Year's Day, Joseph Smith Sr. called his family together and tried to settle a few things. And he had some witnesses there too. So we get this from the Journal of Joseph Smith, and I'm just going to read from the historical introduction. It says this. The Journal notes that as Joseph Smith Sr. spoke, quote, the Spirit of God rested down upon us in mighty power, and our hearts were melted. William Smith then made a humble confession and asked Joseph Smith's forgiveness for the abuse he had offered. For his part, Joseph Smith asked William to forgive him, wherein he had been out of the way. The two men agreed to build each other up in righteousness in all things, and not to listen to evil reports concerning each other, but like brethren, indeed, to go to each other with our grievances in the spirit of meekness, and be reconciled, and thereby promote our own happiness and the happiness of the family, unquote. So I love Joseph Sr., the father, brings them together and says, we got to figure this out. And apparently he was so effective that it melted everybody's heart and it made it better. So then they had a church court the next day, cleared it up officially. William said his sorries. Alvin Babbitt apparently also said his sorries, and we move on from there. So that's quite interesting. The next thing we get from this is a blessing to somebody by the name of Lorenzo Barnes, written in his own hands in a diary which he kept. And this is a blessing that takes 6 pages. And Joseph Smith gives this blessing to him. Lots of wonderful, beautiful promises in here about him and his posterity and his faithfulness. A really wonderful blessing. So that's Lorenzo Barnes. We get a lot of marriage licenses, a few other things. We do get a note from Newell K. Whitney that I thought was really interesting, and it said this, quote, thus saith the voice of the Spirit to me, if thy brother Joseph Smith Jr. will attend the feast at thy house this day at 12 o'clock, the poor and lame will rejoice at his presence and also think themselves honored. Yours in friendship and love, Newell NKW, or Newell K. Whitney. Call it a revelation, call it a guilt trip, but please come to my party tonight. That's what you get there. January 13th meeting where the organization and callings are starting to get cleaned up in preparation for the temple dedication. This was really, really important. So when the temple dedication happens, which we've already talked about, certain people are sitting in certain pews, and quorums sit together, and they need to have a president. They need to have counselors. They need to have, bodies and quorums set up and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of it's by their age. And anyway, all of this starts getting set up from basically January to April. Probably really before the 27th of March. But anyway, it's all, sort of set up in a big way. So a lot of these meetings, that's what we talk about. The next day, we lay down some rules about this new house of the Lord being built, and I got a real kick out of this. So let's lay them down, shall we? We get 2 sets of them, and this is about how to use this temple we're about to build. First, it is according to the rules and regulations of all regular and legal organized bodies to have a president to keep order. Second, the body thus organized are under obligation to be in subjection to that authority. Third, when a congregation assembles in this house, they shall submit to the following rules, that due respect may be paid to the order of the worship. Then we get this, the rules. There are 9 of them. First, no man shall be interrupted who is appointed to speak by the presidency of the church. Second, an insult offered to the presidency or presiding elder of said church shall be considered an insult to the whole body. And there's more to that one, but I'll forego. Third, all persons are prohibited from going up the stairs in times of worship. I bet those were loud. Fourth, all persons are prohibited from exploring the house except waited upon by a person appointed for that purpose. So you can't just be walking around. You got to be, proctored, or you have to have a chaperone. Fifth, all persons are prohibited from going to the several pulpits except the officers who are appointed to officiate in the same. Let's say where you're not supposed to. Sixth, all persons are prohibited from cutting, marking, or marring the inside or outside of the house with a knife, pencil, or any other instrument whatever, under pain of such penalty as the law shall inflict. Seventh, all children are prohibited from assembling in the house above or below or any part of it to play or for recreation at any time, and all parents, guardians, or masters shall be amenable for all damage that shall accrue in consequence of their children. This is before we had gyms in the church, but even then you get busted. Eighth, all persons, whether believers or unbelievers, shall be treated with due respect by the authority of the church. Ninth, no imposition shall be practiced upon any member of the church by depriving them of their rights in the house. Council adjourned, sine die. I love this. I don't know if you've ever seen the rules for the Kirtland House of the Lord, but I would also suggest, once again, I believe that this is the same rules that we have for chapels. Don't go up on the rostrum. Don't play in the room. Stop carving your name in the pulpits, like all that kind of stuff. So I get a kick out of this. Even back then, if your kid draws on my crap, I'm gonna charge you for it. We're gonna come after you. I love it. All right. We get a meeting after this to review and ratify these rules and organize the quorums for the dedication. Meeting the day after that was Thomas B. Marsh. Kind of throws down the hammer about some nasty letters that they got while they were on their missions. So I think in our previous episode, I talked about this. They got sent on their missions. They were sort of like, there was kind of a nasty letter talking about how they weren't doing what they should be doing. And he responded back to that, and he says, I don't think that's fair. And Thomas B. Marsh is the president of the 12. After that, he got a little upset about why people were holding courts after the 12 apostles had already decided on things. And apparently Hiram Smith talked smack about the 12 while they were away. So they sorted that out, said their apologies, and it helped them to get prepped for a solemn assembly that was on its way. Okay. So then Joseph explains all of this in sort of a discourse that he gives during the meeting. And that's the end of that. So we get a marriage certificate, a series of visions that Joseph receives and records, and this is what becomes section 137 of our current Doctrine and Covenants. Now that's way out of order, all right? So for the sake of how the episodes have been organized, we're going to forego that one until later on. I will say just briefly, there's a lot of things about like, hey, if you didn't accept the gospel while you had a chance on earth, then you can do it when you're in the afterlife. Now, this is kind of way ahead because, again, we don't have a Kirtland temple dedicated yet. We don't have keys restored yet. A lot of those kind of things haven't happened. And so it's really interesting that this was the case. And also, you get this sense of like, hey, I saw the celestial kingdom and there's a pavement of gold there. You'll see that when in section 110 when Jesus came. Anyway, all those kinds of things are wrapped up in this. And so this is in sort of a pre-temple era, but it sort of foreshadows a lot of things that are about to come in terms of how the church does work for the dead. But we're going to get into that in detail later on. And so after this, we get a letter from the presidency about a newly organized elders quorum and how it was done, which is really great. And then guess who gets to be the very first elders quorum president in the church? Man by the name of Alva Beeman. That's your first elders quorum president in the church, and he is over the elders quorum in Kirtland, Ohio. So a little history there. The meeting on the next day to explain and ratify why they did what they did with this elders quorum and to reinstate somebody by the name of Harvey Whitlock back into church membership. He was rebaptized, and that was decided there, so that's a happy day. We get some Hebrew grammar and a few worksheets, so look out. We're talking about homework, but guess whose homework we have? We have Joseph Smith's homework, and he's got pretty good Hebrew handwriting here, if I may say so. Not that I speak right or have any idea what the heck I'm talking about here, but it looks pretty clean to me. Anyway, so that's his homework. So I thought that was kind of fun. Not every day you get to see a prophet's homework. So after this, we get some meetings where the 12 are all right to adopt a few resolutions, wanted to modify a few others because they really wanted to be sure that whenever they are in the various branches of the church, they would have the authority to call courts and be participants in those courts, which makes a lot of sense since they're supposed to preside over everybody. We get a few meetings to discuss people to be ordained to the priesthood and voted to accept those names or not. So, and after this, we start getting real license happy. Holy cow. Oliver, Sidney, Frederick, Joseph Sr., they get similar forms of these licenses, and they're all recorded in what's called the Kirtland Elders Certificates book. Thomas Bullock, poor guy, has to write all these down, and there's a ton of these that are coming up. Anyway, but Oliver, Sidney, Frederick, Joseph Sr., they get their licenses. And a lot of this is organized through the minutes of the meeting that we had previously to this. And then the big day comes, right? This is section 109. This is the Kirtland House of the Lord dedication day. 8 hours of meetings, some miraculous things. Please see our first part here to go into that. I've already done a whole thing about that. Really remarkable day. And after that's over with, the first thing that we get in the chronology of documents here is a letter from the 12 who say they don't feel like they were treating their callings seriously enough. They commit to do better, and they commit to be better before they go their separate ways on their missions, and it's signed by their representatives. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, which, I think is one of the reasons why you get a dab before you go on your mission. It resets your mind, it puts you in the right place, right frame of mind, court arms you, so to speak, and then you go on your missions. And that's what happened to the 12, which is pretty fun. We then get a ton of licenses, just lots of different people getting priesthood licenses. Good for you. All of you, you're all in the Revelation or the Elder Certificate book, and we're moving on. We do, however, get an unpublished revelation, which is super fun. These are only found, this writing is only found in Joseph Smith's journal, so this is between 1835 and 1836. Again, the very last thing we get out of this is, Jesus and Elias and Elijah and Moses coming to the Kirtland Temple. That's the very last entry we get. But before that here, we get an A part and a B part of a text. The A part of it reads, the voice of the Spirit was that we should come into this place 3 times and also call the other presidents, the 2 bishops and their councils, each to stand in his place and fast through the day and also the night. And that during this, if we would humble ourselves, we should receive further communication from him. And that is in the handwriting of Warren Parrish. The B part of the text reads this. So a little further in, we get, the word of the Lord came to us through President J. Smith, Jr., that those who had entered the holy place must not leave the house until morning, but send for such things as were necessary, and also that during our stay, we must cleanse our feet and partake of the sacrament, that we might be made holy before him, and thereby be qualified to officiate in our calling upon the morrow in washing the feet of the elders. So those are the revelations. These are all part of a bigger meeting where Joseph Smith declared at the end of that meeting, like everything's been done, temple's been dedicated, we're still kind of working things out, and he says the church was now properly organized. And that, so these events, these revelations that I just read are all part of that. So I think that was pretty remarkable. So that's an important day. found in the journal there. We do get a certificate from somebody by the name of Josiah Sexius or Sexus, who he taught Hebrew in Kirtland and certified that Joseph Smith was an excellent student and a very kind man. I thought that was very nice. We then get a ton more licenses in late March and early April. We then get a meeting on the 2nd of April to decide publications and collecting arrears for past subscriptions to the newspapers that they print. So this is Evening and Morning Star and the Messenger and Advocate. And they decided, like, what course of action are they going to take to get that money back? Because they're doing a lot of stuff and they need this money in order to function. We then get another long list of licenses. And then we get Section 110, which we've already gone through. This is where Jesus and Moses, Elias, Elijah come to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery and apparently bestow the authority to do missionary work, seal people in the temple, and do work for the dead, which is a pretty amazing thing. And if you want to know, that's the kind of the gist of what our temples are all about. So very important day. Then we get a recommendation for Lyman White, letting everybody know what a swell guy he is and that he can be trusted. And that's always nice. Then we get another very long list of licenses. Again, just tons of people just getting ready to get out there and do some good work. And then we get this letter to Oliver Cowdery. This is published in the Messenger and Advocate. And this one's about slavery and abolitionism. Now, this is where I think everybody's going to get upset. If you're against slavery, then you're pinning a target on your back in the day. If you're at all for slavery or maybe against the abolition movement in any way, in modern times, you're going to be seen as a racist and as a slave owner and blah, blah, blah. And so it's kind of a hard letter to read. I'm not going to get into it now for the sake of time, but it's a little bit against abolishing slavery, to be fair. And but Joseph also changed his mind about this a lot. There was a lot of fluidity here. And I think, I don't know, I'd like to think of, with all the mobbings and the stuff and in the different places that he's lived in, that, that kind of informs a person about the world and how it works. But if you don't know, there was Black Americans that were members of the church, and one was even ordained to the 70 during Joseph Smith's tenure as president. So complicated, where you do have this letter that's a little against abolishing slavery, but at the same time, there's a lot of Black men and women that are a part of the church at the time. So yeah, there you go. And then, of course, we get oodles of licenses again, because we're setting up this church that we have. Then we get the minutes of a meeting, including charges against somebody by the name of Jenkins Salisbury, which you should know for reasons you will find out. Charles Kelly is another one. Hannah Brown and Lucina Elliott. So Jenkins Salisbury is actually married to Catherine Smith. So this is Joseph Smith's sister. He was a bit of a hard drinker, drank a lot of hard liquor, and he was in Zion's camp and he did a lot of that, but he was accused of kind of leaving his wife in a really bad state for that winter and of being an unfaithful husband at the same time. So that was a charge brought against him. That was a pretty bad one. Charles Kelly was actually disfellowshipped for conduct unbecoming, more or less. And so both of them are sort of booted out for those charges, which is interesting because, again, like, it's not like he's out of the family. I think him and Catherine stayed married. Speaking of Jenkins and Catherine, I think they stayed married. Anyway, the next day we get, this meeting went a little long, so the next day they went after Hannah Brown and Lucina Elliott for telling falsehoods. And there's very little else that we get from that, but apparently they were kind of telling lies. These were young women, and I guess it happens, and they got reprimanded for that. Then we got a lot of other licenses, more licenses, can't have enough of that. And then we get a meeting where somebody by the name of Azalea Perry is cut off from the church. Job Lewis apparently came after Joseph Smith in the street demanding money and other such things. He was also excommunicated. And then we get some other things that are kind of interesting. We get a promissory note from George Businger, interesting name, for $750 that the church leaders promised to pay him for land in Missouri after 2 years. So they had 2 years to pay back his money. We get even more licenses. And then we get back to another promissory note. And I wanted to point out something about 1800 or 19th century culture that might be interesting. I may have gone through this before. I'll go through it again. We get this promissory note to Ambrose Palmer for $100, 6% interest. You got 1 year to pay it back. And the signature is torn off. Now, why would you do that? Well, that means that, okay, I have this note and your name's on it, and you owe me $100, 6% interest. You need to pay me back in a year. Once I get my money back, then we tear off the signature. That proves that it's been fulfilled, but it still acts as a receipt. So this is just the way that they did it in the 19th century. I think it's very practical, and that's the way it's done. So I guess if you don't have any receipts, just apparently legally, just tear off the signature and you're good to go. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm also an amateur, not lawyer. We get more licenses. And then we get a person by the name of Preserved Harris, and also Isaac McWithy, such a great name. And they had charges against them for not contributing what they should have for the poor. They got really called to the carpet and sort of blamed for a lot of the debt that a lot of the members of the church were having. And what's interesting is they were both disfellowshipped because they both said, well, I can understand you're upset. I am not going to change that. So they got disfellowshipped. Okay, there you go. And I believe Isaac just said, look, if you're just going to kick me out, I'll go ahead and leave the church. And so we did. There you go. We get a few more licenses here, and then we get a certificate for land purchased in Missouri on the 22nd of June. And associated with this is this thing called a receiver's office page for that land deal in Missouri. And just to put this into perspective, and this just makes me upset to read these things, but he bought 400 acres of land for $1.25 per acre. So that means he paid $500 in cash for 400 acres of land. That's good land that you can farm and build a house on. Shush. You're kidding me. Can't even buy a pack of gum for that today. It's crazy. Anyway. On the back, well, I thought this was interesting. It said silver $500. So my guess is they paid him in silver, I think. Not sure. But that's what we get. This is a receiver's page of land purchases in Missouri. Just how they looked. If you've ever bought a house, you can understand how sickening it is that you can actually buy 400 acres of land for $1.25. But, whatever. Anyway, we get licenses, we get agreements, we get deeds, we get promissory notes, we get some receipts for some butter. Didn't know if you really wanted to see that, so I left out the butter. Then we get back to section 111, which is for next week. So there you go. I've gone through all the way to the 3rd of August, 1836. I'm really trying to shorten down the length of these meetings because, or the length of these episodes, because the revelations are no longer driving the narrative here. It's actually a lot of other stuff like missions. There's no revelations for that anymore. It's just the same basic type of license, just repeated over and over again. Or, land deals going back and forth, debts being paid, debts being, added to. All that kind of stuff is kind of how the history is going from now on. So there you have it. The Kirtland Temple dedication and everything surrounding it. This is a consequential beyond words pivotal moment for the history of the church and for the reason why the church is the way it is today, the reason why we have endowments, the reason why missionaries are sent out when they are, why they are. And this applies to everybody. This is men and women, even back in this time. So a very important time. I hope you've enjoyed that. I'm going to probably be blowing through a lot more history as we go forward. But thank you for sticking with us, and have a great week until we see you next time on Filling in the History.